Motivating inventors. Do you want inventors in your company? Interesting question. Hello, and welcome back to Invent Anything. In this episode, we're going to cover ways to explore how inventors need motivation, the challenges they face, the environments that support their creativity. We'll discuss how inventors have been overlooked, how they've been seen as disruptors, how they have unique struggles, and how you learn from this podcast the different types of inventors and the different things they need. And we'll also highlight some of the tools to help inventors thrive, things like mentorship, autonomy, and also even some futuristic AI-driven platforms.
Inventions keep the world spinning. From fire in the wheel to today's high-tech, inventions power change. Turn your inventions into reality. Learn how to get your ideas to market. This is Invent Anything with John Cronin.
And today we'll cover 6 topics. The first topic will be, why do inventors need to be motivated anyway? And then we'll talk about the environment that affects inventors. We'll also talk about the different types of inventors and their need for different motivations. In topic number 4, we're going to talk about the motivation factors. And here we're going to delve into intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. We're also going to talk about in topic 5, the tools, the inventor tools and environments. And then have some fun and sort of predict in topic number 6, the future of motivating inventors. And I also chose these topics to sort of give some breadth to the whole issue of motivating inventors. As I always do when I'm preparing these podcasts, I think about the audience. And this is a very different audience. I would say the audience for this podcast are really larger companies. Of course, it can be for smaller companies, but it's for those that want to maybe somehow kickstart the productivity of their inventors. Or maybe you've not done a good job with your inventor base, and maybe management is calling for more invention disclosures or more inventive capability. This is for you. Also, for one level of an audience, a lot of companies that we've worked with over the years have put together a sort of recognition program for inventors. And we'll certainly cover the topics you need here. Another area for the audience is for those who want to enhance their R&D capability by getting their inventor power going. Another area for audience is really to develop a culture of innovation by enhancing that really important inventor position, which maybe you've not thought about. And finally, another potential audience are for inventors to maybe determine what is happening to you, or maybe think through that, or some things you might want to fight for, or change in your own work behaviors. Now, I'm uniquely positioned to talk about this. I'm a practicing inventor with about 2,000 patents, so I know what it's like to go through this process. I've worked for 15% of the Fortune 500 companies and lots of other companies, and I've trained and worked with tens and tens of thousands of inventors. I've set up numerous recognition programs for inventors. I used to create and I ran the IBM Patent Factory, where we dealt with 17,000 technical people to up the level of invention, which went from 1,000 to 3,500 patents a year. So I'm pretty uniquely qualified for this, and I hope that this podcast, you can take a lot away from it. For me, hopefully, that you can really help your inventors, which is a big part of what I'm all about. So coming up, we're going to be talking about ways to explore inventors' need for motivation in their environments and where the contributions go, many times unrecognized. We'll discuss organization, prioritization, business outcomes over things like inventiveness. We'll talk about the challenges that inventors face because generally they're rule breakers. There's a lot of struggle with recognition. And we'll also examine issues like patent programs and mentorship and leadership focus, hiring practices, and also the balance between creativity to foster innovation and the business needs for results. So stay tuned. Well, let's get right to it. Topic number 1, why do inventors need to be motivated? Well, one thing I didn't mention about my background is I actually have a psychology degree, and that has many times given me an interesting way of looking at things like motivation. Everyone needs to be motivated to do things. And inventors are no different. But if you look at an inventor and their motivation, they're a different breed. They do things that are unexpected. They do things that many times are against organizational behavior. And my background as an IBMer many years ago, I found out that I was getting demotivated by not being recognized as an inventor. And having many patents, I found that, it was engineering, and that was the key. And inventors weren't, quote, considered engineers. Most IBM inventors never called themselves inventors. So I basically kind of recognized in myself personally that I was struggling with, what is an inventor versus what is an engineer. And I finally made a decision uh, to essentially say and start telling people I was an inventor. And that was difficult, but I stood up for that and eventually became a top inventor of IBM, as it turned out. And I've also then proselytized invention really for the rest of my life. And so inventors do need to be motivated, even the best of them. The second thing is that most companies don't recognize inventors. As I mentioned, they'll sort of recognize engineering work or business value or inventiveness, but they won't recognize this concept of, an inventor. Another thing is that, when we talk about inventors, we think about creativity. Well, creativity means new and novel, and therefore it's disruptive many times. And if you're an organization trying to keep things on track, having inventors around to give you creative ideas many times can be a distraction or even slow things down for a time period. And therefore, inventors get that pushback. So what I've found is that very few companies recognize invention or inventors at all, unfortunately. And it's usually some provocation from management that gets them to create a program for it. Like the number of disclosures have fallen down in the company, or the CEO, a new CEO comes in and wants to change the level of productivity of innovation. There's some driving force generally. Another thing is that inventors and invention to many companies means more patents. And in a lot of the aspects of the world, patents are not considered that great. Large companies tend to think of patents as something that they don't want to be litigated against. It's a asset that they'll get, but almost begrudgingly. So patents and inventors are sort of correlated, and patents have a problem. Another thing is that when you start thinking about inventors and times get tough in a company, inventors are the first to leave because they want to go out and do something new. They don't want to stay around and do a lot of the things that might require incremental improvements and things like that. I remember Jack Keeler, president of IBM, telling me when I got recognized by him, he said that he was really worried that when IBM was, going to have to retreat back from, laying off people, he was afraid that inventors would be the first to leave. Another thing is that, and this is a really interesting fact, that the inventor population is very tiny. I mean, if you look at how many inventors there are in the workforce, and if you use patents as one of those metrics, it's 0.004% of the work population are inventors. If you look at unpatented inventions, it's not even close to 1%. So the population of inventors is very tiny. And therefore, just that alone may mean that why would I spend time, trying to motivate that tiny population? Another thing is that inventors tend to work on failures. They're trying to do something that isn't considered working, right? And they're trying to change that. And a lot of times inventors, fail as well. So they're a tiny population working on failure things, and many times they fail. Look at all the struggles they got to put up with. So yeah, they need to be motivated. Another thing is that inventors think outside the box. And this is another problem. Because if you have a person thinking outside the box, everyone's going to push back on their ideas because people want those ideas in the box. And finally, inventors' ideas generally don't reuse existing internal processes. So they're trying to make change. So look at all the things, and I could go on and on and on as to why, if you want inventors to be productive, you've got to recognize they need to be motivated. Let's jump over to topic number 2, the environment that affects inventors. Well, one environmental issue that affects inventors is patent programs. So if the company has a really good patent program, you'll generally find a correlation that people like to be inventors. If, on the other hand, patents aren't recognized, chances are that inventors won't want to be a part of the program because one of their outputs, one thing that they measure themselves about is patents. When they get a patent, they feel it's a great achievement for them. But if the company doesn't recognize that, then inventors will probably stay away from that company. Another thing is that the direction by a company, the environment here, is that some companies are touted as being innovative. Other companies tout themselves as being incremental or sort of adaptive. So one of the environmental factors is set by the executives. Another environmental factor is promotion in the organization. There's a lot of companies that don't recognize patents or inventors as one of the aspects of getting promoted. It's a great environmental factor to look at. Very good friend of mine, an early mentor at IBM, Carter Canta, he was my first manager. He literally put in the performance plans of every engineer that in order to get to the next level, you had to have 3 patents filed a year. So he made it part of the promotion direction for his department. Later on, about 8 or 9 years later, they studied his department because for some reason, his department of 8 to 10 people, engineers, had as a group been top inventors in the company. And you could not take any group of 10 people in IBM that achieved the success of his department. So measuring, invention and patents for promotions is important. Another thing is that environmental factor is mentorship for anything, right? Mentorship to groom somebody for upper management, mentorship to groom someone, to do better deals, et cetera, et cetera. Well, mentorship's a really important thing for inventors. And you'll find that companies that have mentorship programs for inventors basically have better inventors and more of them. Another thing that's part of the environment is how management controls the direction for problem solving and invention. I tell this story all the time. It's a made-up story, but I hopefully get to the point. So supposing I get a group of smart students from MIT, and basically they have high IQs, and I ask them to invent something. And let's use that as a control group. I'll take these 10 students, and I'll look at their output, and I'll have a group of experts analyze this output for quantity and quality. I'm going to go and get another group of MIT students, another 10, all very bright. But I'm going to ask them to invent, but I'm going to say, I want you to solve this problem. I want you to invent something that moves across the table. And then I look at their output, and they do better than the first group. My third group of MIT students, different group, very bright. I give them a challenge. I want you to invent. I want you to solve a problem by moving something across the table. And here's a box of parts that I'd like you to consider using. The box of parts are pieces of Lego or elastics or balloons or rubber wheels or you name it. It turns out that group does better than the first 2 groups. The last group of MIT students I ask them, I want you to invent something. I want you to build something that goes across the table. And here's a box of parts I'd like you to consider using. But I think you should get started by putting this on this, putting this wheel next to this rubber band, use this balloon for propulsion. That group is really directed towards the how, not just the problem and the resources, but the how. It turns out that group does worse than all 3 groups, in terms of quantity and quality. So when you direct somebody to how to do something, you are taking away their inventive skill. So if management is all about really micromanaging folks, you're not going to find many inventors there. Another thing about the environment is who the heroes are in the company. Some companies have fellows, brilliant, engineers and technical people. Some companies have people that author books or win Nobel Prizes or is known in the industry for some, radical kind of thinking. What about the inventors? Is your company recognizing as the hero an inventor? Another area for high levels of creativity and high output for inventors is rule conformity. A lot of companies focus rightly on safety, budget, and all sorts of other factors in the environment. But when you focus on that, but don't focus on the things that motivate inventors, you'll tend to lose inventors and not create them. One of the issues around the environment for inventors is the mission. Have you created sort of a space shot program, something that is very difficult to achieve? Or are you trying to grow the practice of your company at 5%? Which one do you think the inventor would be more apt to show up to? Another thing that's environmental is the hiring. Are you hiring people to be creative? Let's go back to that Carter Cantor group at IBM for a minute. He basically hired people that wouldn't necessarily fit the profile of IBMers that needed to be hired. He hired people of different types at different levels. He was hiring for innovation more than hiring to fill a slot with the right PhD or the right master's guy at the right place. And here's another thing about the environment to inventors. And you might not know this. Invention is not taught in colleges or universities. There's no course that you go take to be an inventor. So, I mean, and very few colleges teach anything about creative thinking. And there's a couple places in the world you can get a PhD in creativity, but that's about it. So think about it. We're not teaching to inventors. We're not mentoring them. We're not doing any of those things. So environment has a lot to do with the inventor appearing, and most times companies don't recognize it, therefore the inventor never appears. Well, let's go on. Coming up in this next round of the podcast here, we're going to explore how different types of inventors require tailored motivation to thrive. We're going to talk about inventors that do problem solving or versus those that go through breakthroughs. We're going to talk about impossible challenges, visionary inventors. We're going to examine their creativity and innovation, how they're all different based upon what they're working on. We're going to discuss the needs of those type of inventors that more are into discovery versus business-driven inventions. We're going to talk about the tools and processes for collaboration. We're going to talk about motivational factors like intrinsic versus extrinsic. And hopefully after this, we'll get a really good idea about the different types of inventors and the ways to motivate them. So stay tuned. So let's go into topic number 3, getting more at the detail level of things. I'm going to talk about different types of inventors and how different types of inventors may need different types of motivation. Now, I said I'm a practicing inventor. I invent every day for companies, and so does my staff. And we have all sorts of processes to invent. They're all road hardened and proven. Even today in the afternoon, I have an invention session with a large food company, and they'll have 12 to 15 people in the Zoom meetings that we're going to hold, using creativity tools to invent. So I've tried to generalize in my practice this sorts of things to help inventors invent more. But if we take a look in it, and I've had the ability to work with so many different inventors in the world, that I was reflecting about the different types of inventors. The first type of inventor is really, are they after trying to solve some specific problem, or are they after trying to create some breakthroughs? These are very different types of people. Usually when you can define a problem well, as Einstein was just asked, if you had 100 units of time, how much time would you spend on defining the problem versus coming up with ideas to solve it? Without even thinking, he said, of course, 95% of the time, I would work on solving the problem, finding it, because once I find the problem, the ideas tend to be obvious. So those type of inventors really need very focused direction. On the other hand, if we're going to expect our inventors to be more or less creating breakthroughs, very different things, well, they need impossible problems. They need problems that are very vague. So just by definitions of the problem, you're going to define, the types of inventor you're going to get. Another thing is that there are inventors that discover stuff, like the vulcanization of rubber by Goodyear. He was trying to find a rubber that wouldn't crack when it was cold and wouldn't be sticky when it was hot out. And he went all around the world looking at materials, and he found some rubber materials in India, and he was trying to find additives for it. And one day He came into one of his boiling vats, and the story goes that a cat had knocked over some jar of sulfur into the mix. And when he started cleaning up the mess, it was hot, but it wasn't sticky. He got excited and then waited till he could cool it off and found out that it wouldn't crack. So it was a discovery invention. And of course, the cat got the patent. No, that's a joke. But people make discoveries. Well, what what kind of motivation environment do you need for discovery? Well, they're going to need access to more time. Edison had 1,000 plants to figure out how to get the light bulb to, behave to last more than 40 hours. You're going to need bigger budgets. You're going to have larger failure rates. There's other types of inventors that work on developmenting, inventions. They're developing something through stages. So generally, these types of inventors need to go off and do sort of more tech scouting, if you will. They need to work with others to move the development process forward because they can't do it all by themselves. On the other hand, we have sort of the incremental inventors. No one's saying that incremental or breakthrough is better or worse. Sometimes companies need incremental inventions. Well, these are people that need more strict guidelines and they need more detailed budgets. So that's the kind of environment for those inventors. There's also visionary inventors. Folks like Elon Musk. Well, ask yourself the question, what does Elon need to get fired up? He needs sort of visionary challenges. And you wouldn't expect an incremental inventor to be a visionary inventor. There's also accidental inventors. These are people that almost see something happen and, they can then take advantage of it. The example I've given many times, is supposing a while back in history, you're walking through the forest and it's dusk out and you see a rock and it's kind of glowing green and you don't know what it is. So you gather some samples back and you take it and grind it up and maybe mix it with some glue and make a little sign out of it. And all of a sudden at night, you've got this sort of illuminated sign made of this ground up material. You don't know what it is, but it works. So accidentally, you tripped onto something that made it work. Well, how can you, what kind of motivation or environments would we use for accidental inventors? And I think what we need to do is to start sort of thinking about the future of AI, because AI has the ability of going through many probabilities, many variations. So teaming up an inventor with some AI tools would be a great environmental change. There are inventors that create business inventions like Uber or something like that. So what kind of environment do you need there? Well, these kinds of inventors, they need access to high-level technology, high-level business problems, and they need to study markets. So those kind of inventors, you'll find them working on the outskirts of technology, market, and business. Some inventors don't work very well alone. Call them collaborative inventors. Well, these type of inventors, environmentally, I would say, need creativity tools more than anybody else. They need a way to work with people. And creativity tools are certainly a facilitative way to do that. Like I said, tonight, I'll be working with a food company, helping them invent with creativity tools. I want to mention something. We mentioned the number of inventors in an organization, less than 1%. Patenting inventors is 0.0004% or less. Well, let's talk about prolific inventors. Well, if there's such a tiny population of people that have patents anyway, you can imagine that the percentage of prolific inventors is really tiny. So what happens when you have an inventor that has 10, 20, 30, 40 patents? Those people, of which I'm one of, how do we get motivated? Well, one of the things about being a prolific inventor is you have to do the heavy lifting of the documentation process. You've got to get your ideas out of your head onto paper or in your computer and work through the process with attorneys. I mean, that's a big administrative load. There are some inventors that have 12 or 13,000 patents. Imagine that administrative load. So you need to surround those people with some support for documentation. And finally, there's other types of inventors that invent in chemical compositions of matter or processes. And these inventors need access to really good failure analysis tools and things like that. By the way, I've only talked about 10 types of inventors. I could say there's many, many, many types of inventors I haven't talked about. But just to give you a flavor about the types of inventors and how they need to be motivated differently. So if you have a program that you're trying to motivate inventors and you try to genericize it, you might find that it doesn't work because your types of inventors are very different. Let's go into topic number 4, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Now, I think you may have known the very basic psychology experiment where you find a bunch of bright kids who like math and have different groups of them. In one group, you give them, math problems, and they like math, and so they do well. They're intrinsically motivated to do math. Another group, you decide you want to get an early start, fire them up. So you decide that every time they get a good grade on a math test, you give them, a recognition reward, like maybe you give them $1 or $5 for every time they got an A or above. That's extrinsically motivated, right? You're extrinsically giving them something for their performance. If you follow this study, the extrinsic motivated group does better than the intrinsic motivated group to start with. Now remember, each one of these groups of students have the same abilities in math. But as the study progresses, you find that the intrinsic motivated group does better than the extrinsic motivated group. But you find something really different, that at the end of the study, if you don't have a group that's motivated intrinsically or extrinsically, but you just have a general population group, it turns out that the extrinsic motivated group does worse than not only the intrinsic, but does worse than a general population. Well, what's up with that? Well, what's up with that is, according to the studies, that extrinsically motivated people see the reward as a salary, as an expectation. And if you don't keep increasing that, it becomes a demotivator. Intrinsic versus extrinsic. So let's look at invention this way, and motivation. Well, one of the intrinsic motivators for inventors is curiosity. Expect them to, come in the laboratory when nobody else is there because they can run experiments. Expect them for asking really crazy questions. Curiosity. Another intrinsic motivation is mastery. People like myself and other inventors that I know really want to improve the skills that they have in mastery. So you might find them, reading extra books or watching extra podcasts to learn things because the inventor needs to take something new into the existing domain. So they may start studying something that you might not expect them to study. Another thing about intrinsic motivation is sense of purpose. That is, you give them the motivation to try to make a difference in the world versus, just improving a product. You'll find that many inventors intrinsically motivated have this sense of purpose. They're driven to do right. They're driven to change society. They're driven to make something work better than ever before. Another intrinsic motivation is creative expression. You'll find inventors having this joy when they're creating, versus an engineer or scientist or employee where they're doing their job, but you wouldn't necessarily find joy. You find someone that's humorous and cracking jokes and humorous a lot, you might find that there's an inventor there. And a fifth area of intrinsic motivation is autonomy. Freedom to work on something, freedom to make their own choices. That autonomy is one of the intrinsic motivated things. Let's switch to the other side, the extrinsic motivation. Well, I mentioned financial incentives. In Germany, for instance, by law, inventors get 10% of the royalties of any patent that they're on that's licensed in an organization. So they're getting a direct remuneration. So you can have some sort of extrinsic motivation for inventors by giving them some licensing percentage fee or profits from commercialization. You could have another extrinsic motivation by recognition. Recognition is something that, grown people cry for. And recognizing inventors in some formal recognition program, like an award for how many patents they've created, or some attribution in a newspaper or social media, where the company's coming out and formally recognizing that individual. That's a high level of extrinsic motivation for inventors. And a lot of times it's incredibly cheap to do. Another thing for extrinsic motivation is competition. When you have the challenge to do something better than anyone else. And that's where the first program, comes up in robotics for kids. My friend John Abely and others are developing these programs for kids where they're challenging which robot can beat up the other robot. Another extrinsic motivation is career advancement. As I mentioned, promotion. Having a separate path for inventors versus for just engineers is what some companies have done. I know we did it at IBM, but having a recognition path for the inventor is one way to motivate inventors. And then finally, another extrinsic motivation is the impact on legacy. Inventors like to leave behind something where they're being known as the innovator. One of the key motivations I've had personally, but I've explained to many inventors, a lot of times I'll go to companies and try to rev up the inventor troops. For me, it's a lot of fun. But what I found is that with my private conversation with inventors is that I say, you know what, when you get a patent and your name is on the patent, no one can take your name off that patent. So there's legacy that your name will be on this patent forever after that. And it's searchable. People can find you. So the patent system is really great from a legacy perspective. And don't discount that you can help inventors form a personal legacy. So let's go to take a look at the next and ending part of the podcast. We're going to be talking about the essential tools and environments that inventors need to succeed, from autonomy to budgets. We're going to discuss varied organizational experiences like mentorship that can amplify creativity. And we're going to take a look about the future of inventors and the kind of tools and techniques that can be used in the future for our inventors. So stay tuned. So topic number 5, inventor tools and environments. So one inventor tool and environment is to challenge the inventor, to give them some specific, really hard problem. Going back to my Carter story at IBM, Carter Kanta, basically he used to give people time at every department meeting to tell us about the problems that we found and what we were doing about them. He didn't want a status report. He wanted to know what problems we were working on. And if you didn't bring problems into the department meeting, you were kind of chastised by him. He wanted to see problems, and he loved impossible problems. So you can imagine what it was like, a 10 or 15 person group working in an environment. It's my first job as an engineer at IBM, because I have a couple double E degrees working on semiconductors at IBM, that I had to go find problems. And the bigger, the better for this guy, Carter. So challenging inventors is a great tool. Another tool is giving people time to invent. I've watched a lot of programs in my time, but the ones that seem to be the most, advanced and get the best results is giving people time to invent. Now, you have companies like Google that would say, and this is a very valuable program, that the employees have to shift 10 to 15% of their time working for a totally different group. So that's giving them a different place to work. Some organizations basically, give inventors time off when they get a patent. So time is something that inventors need because they're usually not measured on their inventive output. They usually have a job, like they're an engineer trying to design something or do something on the line. Invention takes extra time. So giving inventors time is really important. Another sort of thing we could do is to give people their own budget. Give inventors their ability to buy stuff, however limited it was, that they can buy because they want to buy it. They don't have to justify it. I can tell you the more successful I've been in terms of my own labs that I have, buying new tools and things is one of the funnest things in the world to put the new tool in the lab and to play around with it. It's a toy. I mean, all doctors, right? They love new toys. So giving an inventor their own budget would really help them and motivate them. Another thing is to give inventors access to different people, different laboratories, to different outsiders. So to try to prop up the inventor's experiences. Another environmental thing to do to help inventors is to protect them. What did I just say? To protect them. Inventors are people that are going to get into trouble. Uh, Inventors are people that are going to buck the system. Inventors are people that you might find at 2 o'clock in the morning somewhere, with a laboratory change that maybe you didn't approve. Inventors are those people that are doing things because they don't have those things I just mentioned, like access and budget or whatever, but they will find them on their own. And basically, you need to protect them. I have a story about myself whereby I was working on a tool, in the semiconductor, laboratory at IBM in one of the research lab. And basically, I was playing around with some chemistry, and finally, a tool shut off, but the chemistry had leaked into the system, and all the lights went on, etc. And even though I was following procedures, I was working with procedures that had never been done together. Well, I almost got fired, except my manager protected me. He basically stood in front of me to the organization saying, this is the kind of behavior, although a safety issue happened, we don't want to lose these inventors. So protecting inventors is really important because there will come a time when the organization is going to have to determine whether to out the inventor or not. Do you really believe in inventors? Because they're going to do unexpected things. There's another thing we can do to help motivate inventors, and that is to give inventors different experiences. Give them the ability to kind of go outside the organization. Give them the ability to associate different things to their job function. Associative thinking is the very premise of creativity, that you take two things at least that aren't combined and for the first time combine them. So the more you can give the inventor various different experiences, the more creative outputs you're going to see. One thing is there is no kind of group of inventor club. You have the IEEE spectrum, where you have, the Journal of Applied Physics. You have these areas of people getting together that have groups, and you pay dues to these groups. And there is no sort of inventor club that you can join. So helping inventors, giving them access to other inventors is really important. Another thing, and I'm a big believer about this, and I work with lots of inventors who've never even heard of creativity tools. So giving people creativity tools is one way to help inventors invent. Even things like training and patents, believe it or not, is another area that some inventors would just really love to have. So they can think like, successful inventors patenting. And one other thing we can do is to allow inventors to have access to online research. Because you're going to find inventors on their own time, researching things. And I would tell you that some ways to get the safety involved with inventors is to allow the inventor to invent virtually instead of having to go to the lab, allowing them to have access to people or online research. And then another thing, which is kind of the reverse you might think, is allow inventors to mentor other people. Because nothing is more fun to an inventor by showing somebody else what they just did with the aspect of teaching them how they solved this problem or how they came up with this invention. Inventors will talk about their inventions as if they were their children. And so allowing inventors to mentor others is one of the greatest ways to motivate an inventor. Well, I get pretty excited about talking about inventors, and I've thought a lot about the future of motivating inventors. And so this is topic number 6, the future of motivating inventors. Now, there are some that are, quite obvious if you sort of think about it, creating an open innovation platform that allows sort of inventors to talk to other inventors in the organization. We've actually helped companies develop online sort of teams, teams, Microsoft Teams, to get collaboration to occur just between inventors. As they're developing an invention, they can collaborate with a team. We created a tool IP Capital has called Opus, which is a digital inventor where people can come into the platform, invent with other inventors, where the platform asks questions and does research. So some sort of software or some sort of open innovation platform could be in the horizon for the future of inventors. Another thing is that maybe we could offer some flexible intellectual property models, like we talked earlier about allowing inventors to retain some percentage of the success of the royalties or the economic results of their patents. But by flexibility, it could mean that you might want to encourage inventors to work in groups if they're collaborative inventors. You might find some way to, have the inventor, if they come up with a patent invention, to bring them in the manufacturing process of it. So being flexible about how we're going to motivate inventors relative to the intellectual property. One thing we can do is to start thinking right away about AI for invention. We have large language models now that has a corpus of information that the large language model can read. And when it reads it, you can now ask it questions. I've seen some early indications of having AI models read books, and now you can talk to the author virtually of the book it just read. So let's imagine that we take the works of, say, the top 50 inventors, Tesla, Einstein, Elon Musk, or whatever. We take the corpus of information of their work and put it into a corpus, and now allow that to be the friend of the inventor, where they can have Elon or have Einstein or have Tesla as somebody they can talk to. We can do that tomorrow. And as a matter of fact, my firm, IP Capital, is actually working on some of those things. One of the things that, and this is going to be a weird one, but since we have AI and large language models, and since we have AI agents that can actually execute workflows, we can build an AI agent that reads a patent, puts together a monetization package, and starts selling itself through a CRM. So patents can become alive. They can become almost sentient. That a patent becomes something through AI that can self-generate its own monetization. Pretty cool. Another thing we can do is to start thinking about creating VR and AR just for inventors. I mean, we have AR and VR in sort of gaming and so on. So why not create this virtual world that allows inventors to come in to invent in a virtual laboratory? We're already seeing early indications of this. Why not have another motivation by sort of launching some global invention challenge? We've seen this in some big governmental programs like the genome, and trying to analyze the genome. I think that was Bill Clinton's big direction. But we can have global challenges. We invite people in to solve problems, everything from cancer to, having environmental issues solved. So we can create platforms. Why would the government create platforms to allow inventors to come in using AI as a tool to solve problems? How do you get to Mars more quickly? Another thing is we could also create some futuristic ways to enable, virtual market testing. So there are things called conjoint analysis where companies develop programs and basically they use focus groups to essentially try out the product and watch how they do that. Or conjoint analysis, whereby you're analyzing, the functions and features of a product. Why couldn't we do that in a virtual world? Why couldn't we have 100 people, in the middle of a virtual world testing out their inventions? I mean, we have SurveyMonkey, right? So why not go the next step? We also could do things like integrate virtual reality into prototyping. Literally take something you're inventing and be able to fashion it virtually. We could have sort of what's called PCB Way for inventors. So PCB Way is a company in China where you can send your designs and it will turn around and send you printed circuit boards populated with electronics. Right now, I'm building a number of prototypes where we're basically designing the circuits and we send it out as an electronic file and we get the board back populated with devices. Why couldn't we have companies that would do that, where you could take the design and ship it out and have the prototype come back? And then finally, I was always amused at the Harry Potter kind of system. Like you look at the newspaper in Harry Potter's, a movie, and the newspaper articles come alive, and you're watching it, as a movie on the page. So why couldn't we have a Harry Potter-like inventor documentation system? So as you're documenting your invention, the invention's coming alive, where you can interact with it. And then imagine having all these 10 things happening at once. Boy, the world of invention will become so fun. It'll become so advanced. So I think, we could talk about the future of invention and its capability really for a very long time, but I just wanted to leave you with some of these thoughts. So let's wrap up. In our first topic, we talked about why inventors need to be motivated. We talked about things like the unique challenges. We talked about how business results many times are thought more important than inventive results. We talked about the social problems that inventors have. We talked about the idea of the not having enough resources and not having enough specific challenges. There's just such a lot of things of why inventors need to be motivated. We then talked about the topic number 2, the environment that affects inventors, where we discussed, how we are asking questions about, executive direction, where your executive direction may stifle inventiveness versus make it happen. We talked about the MIT students, whereby teaching the how is not how you're going to foster invention. We talked about having missions and bold visions versus narrow direction. We talked about how to hire for creativity. We talked about how you can, teach invention with creativity tools. There's so many things we can do in the environment that affects inventors. In topic number 3, we talked about different types of inventors and different needs. Here we talked about inventors that require, different motivations to excel, problem solving versus breakthrough. We talked about budgets, giving people their own budgets, giving some incremental inventors deadlines versus others, giving them visionary experiences. We talked about, the accidental inventor or the discovery inventor. We even talked about things like the need to understand how to give people access. If you're a business method inventor, give them access to markets and technology and business issues. We talked about prolific inventors. There's so few inventors to begin with. What happens if you have a prolific inventor? That's a small percentage of a small percentage. And what do they need? Giving them tools, for instance, to help them document. So there's a lot of things we can do for different types of inventors needing different types of motivation. In topic number 4, we talked about intrinsic versus extrinsic. We talked about curiosity and mastery and a sense of purpose and things like that affect the intrinsic motivator, intrinsic motivation for the inventor. But we also talked about extrinsic motivation, things like promotions, sharing royalties, things like competition, things like leaving legacy. So there's a lot of things that you can consider intrinsically or extrinsically to motivate. In topic number 5, we talked about the different tools of the environment, things like providing the right tools in the right environment, like challenges to inventors. So giving them autonomy, giving them budgets, giving them access to labs or to different people, giving them access to other organizations to improve their associative thinking. We talked about creativity tools. We talked about patent training. We talked about things like sharing resources. So there's a lot of things we can do, tools in the environment to help inventors. And then finally, we just were talking about the future of motivating inventors, the things that we can do with AI, virtual reality, patents becoming alive, and monetizing themselves. We talked about, inventor groups and collaboration groups. We talked about sort of the PCB way of sending in your design and having your prototype built. And even talking about, having some sort of AI that we could put top inventors into the AI and have that be the mentor of inventors getting started, all the way to Harry Potter style kind of programs that when I'm developing my invention, through the process, something comes alive and helps me do that. So there's just so many cool things about the future of inventing. Anyway, I got to talk about, motivating inventors, and I asked the question, do you really want inventors? I hope that through this podcast, you've sort of thought about that question. And now that I'm leaving you in this podcast, I'll ask that question again. Do you really want inventors in your organization? If so, think about how you can motivate them. You could change a person's life by motivating them. You can create inventors by simply asking them to invent. I remember one of my mentors and my friend Carter, where I started to invent, and I thought, I could get more patents than anybody in this company. And I told him that idea, and he said, John, if anybody could do it, you could do it. So look, motivating inventors is something that's so special that when you find those inventors and you can motivate them, you can get enormous rewards. So this is John Cronin from Invent Anything. And, if you like this, subscribe, I hope, and also maybe join our blog, Invent Anything. We have countless papers on the subject, and maybe even listen to our series, Inventors at Work. Thank you very much.